Hey, hello. My name is Stephanie, and welcome, or if you're coming back, welcome back. Either way, I'm glad you're here, and I hope you're well. So, Dune Part 2 is finally here. Today, specifically. Happy Dune Day, everyone. So today, in honor of Dune, we're going to be talking about, you guessed it, Dune Part 2, because I went to the fan first IMAX premiere tonight, February 25th, for those of you in the future, and I have thoughts. And those thoughts contain a ton of spoilers. So, spoilers for Dune Parts 1 and 2, Dune 1984, as well as spoilers for the Dune saga kind of as a whole. Specifically the original 6 books, but blanket spoiler warning for the whole thing just to be safe. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to start off with my general thoughts about the movie, get into my more, I guess, specific thoughts about the horror and the tragedy of it all. That's about as organized as this whole thing is going to get because I'm only about an hour post movie and this is mostly vibes. So apologies if this is slightly, and by slightly I mean very, disjointed. But nonetheless, let's get into it. Oh, like I said, I went to the fan first IMAX premiere. Shout out to my mom and my partner for going with me. Here is my worm Leto at the premiere. I love taking him to different Dune things, and he's always a big hit. Shout out to everybody who said they liked him and came up and said hi because of him. So, I've seen the movie, and not to keep you in any kind of suspense, and to put it very, very simply, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It was absolutely phenomenal. Denis Villeneuve cannot miss when it comes to Dune. He cannot miss. I've said it once, and I'll say it again, and I will keep saying it until you are sick of hearing it. Dune has one of, if not the best casts ever assembled. I said what I said. Everybody involved gives absolutely fantastic performances. Everybody from the main cast to the more minor characters, everybody just absolutely knocks it out of the park. Austin Butler was absolutely great as Feyd-Rautha. He was unhinged and terrifying in the very, very best way. Javier Bardem is an amazing Stilgar, and he is an absolute highlight in this. Léa Seydoux was absolutely terrifying. And while she did not have a hell of a lot of screen time, she stole every single thing, every single scene that she was in. And I wish we'd gotten more of her as Margot Fenring, but oh my god, what we got was absolutely amazing. And Rebecca Ferguson was probably my favorite performance in this entire movie. Again, there's not a single bad performance in this movie, in my opinion. Not a single one. Not a single one. I said what I said. Everyone was fantastic. Absolutely everyone, but Rebecca Ferguson brought such a menace and a malice to Jessica, especially after she drank the water of life. And that scene where she says that they need to target the weak Fremen to convince them that Paul is the Messiah is just so bone-chilling and so deeply unsettling. I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. Go on a bit of a tangent because, I don't know, that's who I am as a person. I have absolutely loved the way that the Bene Gesserit have been presented in Dune Part 1 and especially in Part 2, because these are the only adaptations that, in my opinion, have truly shown just how absolutely terrifying the Bene Gesserit are. Absolutely all love and light to the 1984 version of Dune and to the miniseries and their portrayals of the Bene Gesserit, and I mean that from the very bottom of my heart because I think they did some really unique things with these characters, but the Bene Gesserit in Denis Villeneuve's Dune are terrifying, which the Bene Gesserit very much are. They are terrifying and have been playing the long game for centuries. They are powerful and they are manipulative and they are everywhere. They are in your house, they are in your courts, and they have been pulling the strings from the shadows. I think that both of these adaptations do such a phenomenal job, again, just showing how unsettling and manipulative and terrifying they are. Take a shot every time that I say terrifying, but don't actually do that because I think it might kill you. But again, they are absolutely terrifying in these movies, and I am absolutely for it. Okay. Tangent over. Back to the movie stuff. Like Dune Part 1, Part 2 has an absolutely amazing soundtrack. It's Hans Zimmer. Of course, it's amazing. Do I even need to say that? No. We all know. All of the sound design in this movie is amazing. Those scenes on Giedi Prime, especially when Fade is fighting in the arena, the sound design there is just so, so good. It is so, so good. And one thing that it does so well is the way that it uses silence, right? The moments of silence in this movie have such a weight to them, such a gravity. They are very, very heavy, they are very, very meaningful, and they are so well utilized. Amazing. Absolutely amazing, amazing, amazing. The character designs are also amazing. The effects are fantastic. My theater cheered every time the sandworms appeared because we are, in fact, people of taste. The pacing was really, really solid, and the movie really, really does such a phenomenal job at build up, right? And the tension is so, so on point because, you feel that something horrible is going to happen. That once Paul finally goes south, that this terrible, unstoppable thing will finally be set in motion, and once it is, there will be nothing that anyone can do to stop the carnage and the devastation that will follow in its wake. Dune Part 2 does tension absolutely fantastically. It is so, so good. That being said, and this is going to sound strange, maybe not since it's coming from me. Even though this movie is almost 3 hours long, I almost feel like it could have been longer. Now, I don't mind the shortened timeline of Dune Part 2. In the novel, Paul lives with the Fremen for about 2.5 years, might be closer to 3, but probably about 2.5 years. Whereas Dune Part 2, the movie, takes place over about 8-ish months, because Jessica is barely, barely pregnant with Alia. Again, brief tangent, I cannot wait to see what Anya Taylor-Joy does with the character. Cannot wait. And at the end of Dune Part 1, Jessica is about 8-ish months pregnant, according to my mom, and I believe her. Again, I don't mind the shortened timeline, and again, I've said this before. Dune is very, very dense. It is very, very lore heavy. There are lots of moving parts to Dune, plans within plans, if you will. I love that they included that line. It's one of my favorites. And I think both movies do a really fantastic job of condensing the story that is going to appeal to people who might not be super familiar with the source material. And I get that some things are going to get cut. I knew they probably weren't going to include Leto the First, Paul and Chani's firstborn son, who was killed when Sietch Tabor is attacked. But I still kind of wish the movie had been just a little longer, and I wish we'd gotten to see Thufir and what happens to him, because the reunion between him and Paul at the end of Dune is one of the most tragic moments in the book, and that's saying something, but I'm guessing the implication in Dune Part 2 is that he was killed during the fall of Arrakeen, which, again, I get, but I wish we'd gotten to see that moment because, I don't know. I like sadness. Dune Part 2 also made some changes, which for the most part I liked and honestly thought worked really, really well, like having the Bene Gesserit have been the ones who told Shaddam IV, which again, sorry, tangent. While I loved Christopher Walken's performance as an older emperor whose power is rapidly slipping through his fingers, he was absolutely fantastic. Again, in my opinion, there's not a single bad performance in this movie. That being said, I wish we really had gotten to see more of the opulence and the decadence of House Carino. The man has a gold lion head throne, for God's sake, and it's kind of the one design choice I wasn't really wild about, but I digress. They were the ones who ordered Shaddam IV to wipe out House Atreides. I think this is a really effective and fantastic way of showing just how manipulative, and again terrifying, the Bene Gesserit are. Because while their power is a quiet kind of power, they are so, so powerful that the Emperor of the literal known universe obeys them. And I really liked too that Chani wasn't immediately a believer in the prophecy. She actually calls out Jessica and the Bene Gesserit and how manipulative they are, how they use the Missionaria Protectiva, which, to greatly oversimplify what that is, it is the Bene Gesserit planting of these myths and legends and prophecies that they could be used to manipulate a world's population. She calls out how manipulative this is. She does not immediately believe in the prophecy or in Paul and that he is the Messiah. I love that she has doubts, that she believes that if there is a Messiah that is going to come, that it should be one of them. It should be a Fremen. The Messiah should come from the Fremen, which, in the end, she's right about. The true Kwisatz Haderach, Leto II, Paul and Chani's son, and listen, I know what the expanded books say about Duncan Idaho being the Kwisatz Haderach, and as much as I am an expanded novels defender, and yeah, canonically, I can see how you would be able to make that argument, I just don't like it. To put it super duper simply, I frankly, I just don't like it. And I think it takes away from the tragedy of Leto II and what he had to do and what he had to become. And again, I just don't like it, so do with that what you will. And to go on another tangent, because why not? I love the way that they showed the progression of Paul and Chani's relationship. I think it was really well done and felt very organic, especially given the time that they had to portray it. I love that scene where Chani was explaining the wind trap and Paul is just looking at her like that. Like he'd watch her read a cereal box and think it was the most interesting thing. And that moment at the end where Paul tells her, I'll love you as long as I'm breathing, or something along those lines, excuse the paraphrasing on my part. And then to take Irulan as his wife, even if it's only in name, and to see Chani shatter and come to the realization that the person that she fell in love with is gone, that absolutely broke my heart into a million little pieces. Again, for the most part, I not only liked the changes that they made, but I thought they worked really, really well. That being said, I so wish we'd gotten Alia. As much as I loved the way that she was portrayed in this movie because it was phenomenally unsettling and kind of low-key, high-key horrifying, and I was absolutely here for it, I also think it does a fantastic job of laying the foundation for what she will become. I still wish we'd gotten to see her more properly, if that makes sense. And this is kind of a personal nitpick on my part, and I fully acknowledge that. So again, do with that what you will, and let me preface what I'm about to say by saying this. I absolutely love the ending of Dune Part 2. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, but I loved the ending. That being said, my favorite Dune quote wasn't in the movie, and I'm kind of bummed about it. See, I told you it was nitpicky. Dune has so many iconic lines, and I have many favorites, but my absolute favorite is actually the final line in the novel, and it is spoken by Jessica to Chani after Paul says Irulan will be his wife, but she will only be his wife in name, and that he loves Chani only. But, understandably, Chani is not thrilled with this and expresses as much. And Jessica tells her, think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives. History will call us wives. Something about that line makes me absolutely insane. And I just wish we'd gotten it in Dune Part 2. Like I said, that's a little nitpicky on my part, but it's one of my favorite lines and I wish we'd gotten it. Do with that what you will. So those are my general movie thoughts that can be boiled down to simply, movie good, go see it, it's great, it's a good time. Now I'm going to get into the horror and the tragedy of it all. That's kind of the best way I can describe it, so Let's get into that happy topic. Dune often unfairly gets boiled down to being a typical heroic story. And for all the love that I very much have for David Lynch's Dune, which, as you are well aware, I have a lot of love for it, and for all the darkness and the macabreness of it and its tone, the ending very much leans into that misconception, in my opinion. At the end of David Lynch's Dune, Paul is victorious. He defeats the bad guys and makes it rain on a world where it has never rained. It feels heroic, it feels almost hopeful. And what I love so much about Dune Part 2 is that it never feels heroic. Not once. Even the moments of victory that Paul has feel tinged with this undercurrent that something awful is coming. That every step he takes is leading to something terrible. This awful destiny, this terrible purpose that he cannot stop. A destiny that he is damned by. A destiny that will have devastating consequences for not just the people he loves and holds dear, but for the entire galaxy. Dune is not a story about heroes. There are characters in it who do heroic things, but Dune is very much not a story about heroes. It is a story about the dangers of putting your faith in charismatic leaders and the harm that can cause. In the beginning of Dune Part 2, Paul seems initially ready to take full advantage of the Fremen, believing that he is their messiah in order to get his revenge not just on the Baron, but on the Emperor himself. He tells Jessica something like, "They don't all believe yet, we need to convince them." But the more time he spends with them, living with them, fighting alongside them, learning from them, telling stories and learning about their lives and this world that is theirs yet has never really been theirs, he starts to care for them and starts trying to resist this destiny that he has. He tries so hard to avoid going south because once he goes south, he will be firmly set on the path that will lead to death and devastation for trillions of people. And this is so unbelievably tragic to me because we know how this ends for Paul, who again is very much damned by this destiny. This is part of the reason I wish we'd gotten Count Fenring in the movie, because I love that realization that Paul has that Count Fenring, is a failed Kwisatz Haderach. Like Gaius Helen Mohiam says, the Bene Gesserit think in centuries, and they've been manipulating these bloodlines for centuries to produce a Kwisatz Haderach they could control. It's why the Missionara Protectiva exists, so that if a Reverend Mother needed to, she could use those myths and prophecies seeded centuries ago to manipulate an entire planet of people. Once Paul goes south, once he accepts his role in all this, there's no stopping it and the suffering that is going to follow in its wake. It's not just Paul who is the charismatic leader we should be worried about, because he very much is, make no mistake, and I think Timothée Chalamet did such a fantastic job showing that change in Paul after he takes the water of life, and the person that he becomes, and the horror that he has set in motion after spending so much of the movie fighting against that destiny only to end up succumbing to it in the end. He was absolutely phenomenal. But like I said, he's not the only charismatic leader in this movie we should be worried about. It's Jessica too, because the way that she and Alia convert people into believing Paul is the Lisan al-Gaib is absolutely terrifying. That moment, like I said, when she says that not everyone believes, so they need to target the weak Fremen, because once they get the weak ones, the strong will fall in line. That is absolutely chilling. And going off of that, the way that fanaticism is initially portrayed as almost comedic at first, like no matter how much Paul says he's not the Messiah, they're like, yeah, that's exactly what the Messiah would say, you're not going to fool us. That scene where Stilgar says, of course he says he's not the Lisan al-Gaib. The Lisan al-Gaib would be too humble to say he's the Lisan al-Gaib was like one of my absolute favorite moments in the movie. I love that so much. But it becomes very not funny, because by the time we see Paul ride the worm, I think most of Sietch Tabor at this point fully believes that he is the Messiah. And then once he addresses the War Council after finally having gone south and taken the water of life and fully become the Kwisatz Haderach and succumb to that terrible purpose, this belief in him that he is the Mahdi, that he is the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, shows just how deep that fanaticism runs. And then at the end, when the great houses refuse to accept his claim to the throne, whereas in the book, the guild interferes. Sadly, we don't get to see a guild navigator in this movie, which I was a little disappointed by, but they interfere at the end of the book because war is bad for spice production. But here, the Landsrat refuses to acknowledge Paul's claim to the throne, and Paul tells the Fremen to send them to paradise. And thus begins this terrible holy war. And again, this is so deeply tragic after having watched Paul fight against this destiny. And it is also so horrifying because we know the death and devastation and the suffering that is going to follow. End of Dune Part 2, Paul is seemingly victorious. He has avenged his father and his house, he's defeated the Harkonnens and the Emperor himself, and come into this amazing power. He has helped take back Arrakis. He's the chosen one. He's the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, the Mahdi, the Kwisatz Haderach, and yet it never feels like a victory. It feels terrifying. It feels tragic, it feels horrifying, because we know what's to come, and what's to come is so, so much worse. And I cannot wait to see it. In conclusion, movie good, go see movie. I loved the movie. Worms awesome. Apologies if this is slightly very disjointed. Like I said, this is mostly vibes, but as always, thanks so much for listening to all that. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one, and may the spice flow. Goodbye.